So one of the things that we need to talk about in order to make our Cartoon Me project better is how light and color is different on a three-dimensional object. So basically I have an object right here. It's a geometric sphere. Um, if you think of it, the light source would be up above this sphere and coming down onto it. So you can see that this is just talking about lightness and darkness only, and how that's going to affect our color. So you can see the brightest white is going to be here, down to here, which is more like a muted gray. Here is our grayscale on the right-hand side, brightest white, darkest dark, and everywhere between. One thing that we want to do also talk about is the way that your eye also perceives things. Your eye has a very good grayscale visibility. Essentially, what I mean by that is your eye's ability to see the subtle differences in color is much better than what the computer is able to manufacture. If you were to take a picture with your camera, your eye is like so much more detail oriented more sensitive rather, to be able to see the difference between those colors than what a camera can actually do. Now, nowadays, cameras are able to see better and better and better, but they're still not quite exactly what the differences your eye can actually come out with. You can see that even like with taking a picture in just say even this classroom. If you notice, your eye is able to see inside this classroom, but if I were to go and take a picture just with my camera, no like long exposure, just do everything automatic, it's going to be a relatively dark photo. It's only going to pick up little hints of light here and there, and then the darkness is going to be super dark. Versus if I look with just my naked eye, I can see subtle differences from the shadows over in one corner of the room versus in the middle of the room versus right in here in front of me at my desk. So that being said, that's why I added a little bit more of a grayscale here, even though there's really only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different layers right here. So again, what I want to show you is the difference of the way that light essentially affects color. So you can see here I put the brightest white. I put kind of a mid-tone that's probably somewhere right around here. One of these two grays is where I got the darkness of the shadow. One thing that I did add was an adjustments layer that is a contrast layer. Basically all I did was just open it up and I left it alone. I just immediately closed it. To get back to it, I'm going to double click on this and you can see how that brings that back up on here. Basically, if you were to bring the light source closer, that would add more contrast. So essentially what I would do is I would bring this contrast bar up. You can see how the darkest darks get darker and the lightest lights kind of get lighter. Think of the same thing for the brightness here. You can see as the light goes down, we have there. Now, because I use the white rather than this first level of gray, that's why this isn't changing. Probably should go back and fix that, but for today's lessons, it's okay. So essentially what I did there is I just wanted you to be able to see the difference in the contrast. Basically, as I go up, you can see the darkers get dark, the lighters get light, and those mid-tones kind of flatten out a little bit. If I bring down the contrast, you can see that everything flattens out. You can barely notice the difference between what's supposed to be the darkest dark and what's supposed to be that first level off of the white up here. Again, should have used that first level of gray rather than bright white, because even in our photos, we never really want to use bright white because everything always has some kind of color on it. The only time we ever want to use white is if something's see-through in a project, and there's a reason for that, and we'll talk about the different file formats later on that'll allow essentially a white to be transparent in a photo, and as I said, we'll talk about that later. So anyway, so I'm going to put this back to what it was, 0, 0, and I'm just going to exit out of it. Notice that everything is back to the way that it was. Nothing changed. Again, if I want to go back to that, I'm going to double click this. I'm going to provide this file to you guys so you can kind of play around with it, and also so you can play around with color as well, because if you notice right here, I did add a color layer. Again, we have our brightest bright of the color, and then as it goes down the grayscale, you can notice that this looks darker. You can zoom out and you can really see the difference from the brightest bright to the darkest dark. And I can also change this color if I want to. Again, double clicking on the adjustments layer, that's going to allow me to change this color to any color that I wish. Now there's a reason for me to set this up the way that I do. So if we take a look at my Cartoon Me project, essentially what I did when I was creating my face is I took my neutral, which is basically the color of the face that I chose was going to be my base color, and then I changed all the rest of the colors based off of that single color to make it either brighter or darker, because basically I wanted everything to kind of stay in the same color family. If I did things, just pick them randomly, then they don't mesh well together. And I would say even, I don't necessarily like so much that the shadow exactly, but it is a pretty good representation. Again, there's little hints here and there that need to be adjusted, even on shape-wise. But again, in color, there's just this little thing that's a little off, and I probably could have done a little bit better of a job. To do a better job, I can go back to this and take a look at the way that the color should essentially transform over the curve. So essentially, if this was my face, and just even think of my cheekbone, I have really large cheekbones, and they're very pronounced. So this would be my lightest light of that sphere that I have there. And then as things come off, I would come basically either come off to the side with a darker color in the same hue, or if I wanted to just create like a little subtle difference, I kind of would follow down on that grayscale. Now, naturally, our faces have different colors based off of not just the color of our actual skin, but there's other light that actually comes into effect, and that's called the ambient light. So ambient light is kind of like reflected light also. Like, so if, say a light is being bounced off of, say there's a red table in front of me, and the light is being bounced off that red table, it's going to pick up a little bit of that red color, and it's going to bounce up onto my face and change the color to a little bit of a red in, say, the light underneath my chin if the light was bouncing up, or even the shadows, if it kind of add that little bit of red color to it. We're in that red family, not necessarily a bright red. But just that little bit of change definitely makes a huge difference in the way that the light's going to be. Now again, if I go back to my original image here, you can see that I have that like muddy purplish almost color in here, although it did get a little bit later here, which I probably should have added in. However, when I was playing around with my image, I kind of just didn't really necessarily like that later color being added in there. It didn't necessarily sit well, so that's why I got rid of it. But again, this is just a refresher about color. So anyway, so back to here. As I said, I'm going to provide you with this file, and you can mess around with this as much as you want to try to help you understand the way that the color should kind of turn around an object in order to make it three-dimensional. Again, as I said, other things come into play when you're talking about ambient light and things like that. But since we're creating kind of a flat image, we can kind of stick to this just different grayscale value of a color, essentially, with the drop in saturation into shadows. So notice, though, that there is no black in here. The only time we would ever essentially create a black color is essentially if we wanted a really nice dark contrast. So I'm going to move this contrast layer up. I'm going to double click on it, and I'm going to add that contrast back in. You can see that even as I add a lot more shadow, meaning that bright white got brighter, and then there's less of a step value, there's more of a step value between each of these colors rather than being a little more subtle. Notice that down here, it's still not super dark. It's still not it's not black. We have that grayscale that's added in. So essentially, in this darkest shadow area is more the average of between the middle and the bottom color, the darkest black that you can find. You kind of want to use that middle average somewhere around there in order to create a better color scheme in your image. Same thing for this top half, so this lighter colors. These colors that are here are still more around the average between the lightest light and the mid-tone. So again, I just want to remind you guys of that. If you haven't learned that in your previous art classes, or you haven't taken any art classes before, those are some of the things that you have to think about when you're coloring your project. So as I said, there will be multiple videos that are going to be added for this project, just to kind of help you out just a little bit, to help you figure out how you want to not only cartoon yourself, but also how you want to color that cartoon as well. So let me know if you have any questions. And as I said, I'm going to add this file so you can mess around with it and get a better idea of what the color is going to look like and how it's going to change.